Hello friends, this is Adnan Qaiser once again with our discussion on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or CPEC. I believe those who have been with me in the past six chapters, they must have gained some value or insight out of this discussion because it's very important for you to understand various aspects of CPEC. If you remember, I gave you a brief outline of this BRI or Belt and Road Initiative, which China has undertaken in Asia and Europe, connecting about 60 countries of the world. And then I gave you an overview of how it has unleashed an undeclared war for naval dominance in the Indian Ocean. Then we came on to discuss various advantages and what were the constraints for China to go for this alternate trade routes in the world. We also analyzed Sino-Pakistan relations in their historical context and to understand what is the scope in the past and how these relations are going to be strengthened and further expanded in the future. If you remember in the last chapter, which was chapter number 6, we covered various aspects of Sino-Pakistan relations. So now in this chapter 7, I would like to discuss the CPEC's master plan. CPEC's master plan, as well as I would like to tell you how our last government of Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz had been giving lavish concessions to our Chinese investors and how they have assumed financial liabilities in case of their default or not meeting their profit targets. So, if you have read my paper, which I had written in 2014 on Sino-Pakistan relations, I had discussed all these elements which we discussed in the last part of our discussion. The length and breadth of Sino-Pakistan relations in the field of nuclear and defense and strategic cooperation or partnership. But leaked CPEC Master-Plan, it is also called as the Long-Term Plan or LTP, which has been prepared by China Development Bank and Chinese National Development Reform Commission, who are considered to be the two biggest stakeholders in CPEC. It reveals hair-raising details about how China plans to virtually colonize Pakistan. The master plan came out in Pakistan's very eminent newspaper, Dawn, in its issue on 21st of June 2017, which created a lot of furor. The government was pretty angry and upset after the report came out. But despite the government has tossed and turned and cried foul about leaking this information, it has never fully refuted the details which were given in the CPEC Master Plan leak, which means that there must be some element of truth in that. So according to the Master Plan, Pakistani government has already agreed to, and I'll just give you a brief outline, deep and broad-based Chinese penetration into Pakistan's economy as well as its society. Number 2, Pakistan leasing out thousands of acres of agricultural land to China, which means Pakistan plans to mortgage or lease out its sovereign territory or soil to another country, no matter for development purposes, but it could be termed as a modern form of colonization. Number 3, China establishing a full monitoring and surveillance system with 24 hours video recording of all major cities in Pakistan. Number 4, kindly pay attention to this point. China installing a national fiber cable, optic cable, not only for the high-speed internet, but also for terrestrial television broadcast, with Chinese media disseminating Chinese culture 24/7 to the people of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Number five, building Chinese market presence in electronics and telecommunication, textiles and garments, cement and building materials, fertilizer and agricultural technologies, without having any much of a realization that what would be its adverse effects on our domestic or local businesses and industry. Number six, visa-free tourism for the Chinese nationals into Pakistan. Ironically, not on reciprocal basis, which means that this visa-free facility would not be available to the Pakistani nationals who would like to visit China for tourism purposes. And finally, introducing coastal tourism and nightlife in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I don't want to go into the details of what constitutes coastal tourism and nightlife. You guys are adult enough to understand, and those who do not know may like to Google it. So kept under the closed wraps and even hidden from our smaller Pakistani provinces, as well as our Gilgit-Baltistan region in the north, the LTP, or the Master Plan, envisages taking initial shape by year 2020 by overcoming so-called bureaucratic, technical, and social bottlenecks. After which this CPEC project looks forward towards the CPEC's Vision 2025, covering all areas of binational cooperation, which include, number one, connectivity, construction of an integrated transport system. I think this refers to all the road and rail network which is going to be installed in Pakistan. Number two, cooperation for implementing a Gwadar Trade Cities Master Plan. Number three, installation of information network infrastructure. It plans to have an internet submarine cables as well as terrestrial television broadcast of Chinese television in Pakistan, which I mentioned earlier. Energy-related fields, I think this refers to all the coal-powered, the solar-powered, and the wind-powered plants, and without having any much of a consideration or realization about the ill effects of coal-powered plants. I will come and discuss this later in detail. Number fifth is trade and industrial parks, which I believe are all the special economic zones, or what are called the SEZs, said to be made exclusive for Chinese investors and entrepreneurs at the moment. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, I had mentioned it earlier as well, in hushed voices, these SEZs are being called as China enclaves. Number six, agricultural development, which include agricultural experimentation farms by leasing out thousands of acres of land to China, and strengthen drip irrigation technology for water conservation and efficiency. Then is the strengthened production of horticulture products, whatever that means. Poverty alleviation is number seven. I don't know what is the nature and scope of this very important project, but China has successfully taken out a significant number of its poor population out of the shackles of poverty. Poverty in China stood at 10.2% in year 2012. However, under the dynamic leadership of President Xi Jinping, it was lowered to an astonishing 3.1% in just last year, 2017. So thus China became the first country in the world to have achieved or met the United Nations Millennium Development Goals in poverty alleviation and reduction. Number 8 is tourism, which I have mentioned earlier. Number 9 is people-to-people contact. It's very important, which means areas of cooperation in connecting people from ordinary backgrounds for their livelihoods, as well as the cooperation of non-governmental organizations and their exchanges. And finally, the extensive economic cooperation or financial cooperation that include cooperation between financial institutions like our central or state bank and commercial banks, cooperation between financial markets, stock exchange, etc., and financial cooperation between free trade zones. I think this free trade zones here refers to all the special economic zones which we will be talking about in due course. So now, so this is the background of master plan. Pay attention to these words, and I would recommend you to go and read the Dawn newspaper's report in depth. Now let's talk about how the last government of Pakistan Muslim League had made CPEC agreement a kind of a liability or a noose around the neck for the people of Pakistan by giving undue concessions to Chinese investors. Despite seeing value in this CPEC project, transforming Pakistan's emerging economic situation or economy into a mature economy, even the world-renowned Forbes magazine in its report on 18th of April had expressed concerns about the CPEC project hurting the country of Pakistan by adding to its corruption. I'm quoting from the News International's report of 18th of April 2018. The News is another very eminent newspaper of Pakistan. So it says, pushing the costs of the project higher by the day, Forbes has foreseen Pakistan getting more indebted to China. Anxiously watching Pakistan already living beyond its means, as evidenced by its persistent current account deficit by US dollars $3,867 million or nearly $3.9 billion, and Pakistan's external debt jumping to US dollar 88,891 million, which comes to an equivalent of 89 billion by the fourth quarter of 2017. Forbes had ominously predicted that Pakistan would be swapping or exchanging its debt for equity. Equity is physical possession of what you have. So it is similar to the model which was adopted by Sri Lanka in its Hambantota port. That is granting the Sri Lanka's Hambantota port ownership to the Chinese government through its one of its enterprise, which is called China Merchants Ports Holding Company, for 99 years in 2017. So here a word about trade deficit. You are already aware that our trade deficit stood at $3.19 billion in August 2018, just last month. Trade deficit, ladies and gentlemen, is basically a difference between a country's imports and exports. And just remember that the current account deficit as well as trade deficit are almost one and the same thing. And mind you, if we take into account the trade deficit of Pakistan in just 1 year, that is the financial year 2017 or 2018, it stood at a staggering $37.7 billion, with our imports skyrocketing to an astonishing $60.9 billion in just last year. The government justified this high trade deficit owing to CPEC-related machineries import in the country, yet it remains a great cause of worry for all of us. And those of my friends who have studied business or economics in their studies, they would know that how high imports and low exports lead to pressure on your currency. And you had seen that the moment Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz government ended its term this year, the rupee had tumbled down. It plunged down to about 25 to 30% immediately, and now I think it has stabilized at around 124 or 125 dollar rupees to $1. So, being a Pakistani origin person, ladies and gentlemen, it's very painful for me to see that no major Canadian bank would like to deal in Pakistani rupee anymore. This is probably because of our currency's instability and fluidity and the risks which have been associated to it in the international markets. So viewing the grant of Sri Lanka's Hambantota port to China for 99 years for not being able to carry out its debt servicing or paying back the Chinese loans, Forbes magazine had noted in its report, and I would like to quote, that the swapping of territory to China has turned Sri Lanka into a Chinese semi-colony in a subtle way. Very deep words, and which need to be paid attention to. So, as ladies and gentlemen, CPEC comprises of two major areas of investment that are coal power projects, electricity generating plants, and infrastructure development, such as roads and railways around the country. The last government's dubious silence on what comes under foreign direct investment and how much falls under the category of foreign loans, reportedly on unfavorable terms and with additional country risk specific insurance surcharges. All this makes CPEC's financial outlay quite questionable. Furthermore, you might be aware that our country is plagued by another menacing debt, which is called as circular debt. You may know that the circular debt comes from the unpaid payments to the organizations which are involved in our oil and energy sectors, as well as electricity distribution and generation system. So, owing to our past political leaders' ill-thought policies and the sovereign guarantees which they had given to the independent power producers in early 1990s, the circular debt further gets accumulated due to unpaid electricity bills. The inadequate transmission lines, the line losses during the electricity supply and distribution, and electricity theft through meter tampering and illegal connections, which obviously is the hallmark of our political governments. Along with the shortage of electricity in the country, this circular debt, ladies and gentlemen, remains a major reason behind our persistent load sheddings and power blackouts. And you might be horrified to learn that today Pakistan's circular debt has reached to a frightening level of 1.18 trillion rupees. I'm quoting from the figures of a report on 9th of September 2018, just this month. So, however, in its indiscreet haste of installing 19 coal-powered plants worth 15.56 billion US dollars, the government had guaranteed 17 to 20% of return on investment or return on equity, which is said in dollar terms, on the Chinese investment. And if you add the lavish tax and custom duties exemptions, generous tax allowances on these, on the return on Chinese investment, or ROI, shoots up to some 25 to 30%, which is pretty disturbing. So it is totally unjustified when we see that the Chinese companies which are involved in coal-powered plants in Bangladesh on BRI or OBORs, One Belt, One Roads, Bangladesh, China, India-Myanmar BCIM alignment or corridor. They are offering electricity to the consumers at 0.062 US dollars per unit. So $0.062 as against Pakistan, which is buying electricity from these Chinese producers at $0.092 US dollars per unit. It is way beyond the reach of an ordinary Pakistani. And as this was not enough, Pakistan's National Electric Power Regulatory Authority, or what is called NEPRA, has slapped the security costs of CPEC on the hapless consumers of Pakistan. The security costs of CPEC is expected to be extracted from the poor consumers' electricity bills through back-breaking electricity bills for the next 20 to 30 years, mind you. So security costs are basically the monies spent on securing the three CPEC routes which are passing through Pakistan, which I had mentioned earlier, from any terrorist attack or regional mischief. You know, we are located in a pretty interesting region, so both our flanks are not very friendly to us. So I'm not exactly sure about how much is the security cost, but I think I have read it somewhere that it comes to about 1% of the total CPEC project's cost goes as a security cost in our electricity bills. So now understand, NEPRA is an independent or autonomous federal organization and is mandated to protect the interests of ordinary consumers of Pakistan. However, it has been reported in the media that NEPRA took this decision under the directives of the government of Pakistan, the last government. Moreover, as I had said right in the beginning, the government has absolutely no regard for the dreadful climatic and environmental effects of coal power plants. All over the world, even in China, these coal power plants are being decommissioned due to their ill effects on the health of the people. However, our government has been hardly worried about the adverse effects of industrial scale smoke on people's health, and as I had mentioned, that it would ultimately restrict movement due to lack of visibility when it turns into smog, when smoke mixes up with fog during the winter months in Punjab province basically. And to add insult to the injury, Pakistani government had further assumed 22% of these power producers' financial liability in case of their payment default, granting them sovereign guarantees of the state of Pakistan. So such imprudent concessions may well turn this trumpeted game changer project into a nightmarish situation for the people of Pakistan in the future. So we have to be concerned about this. We have to know the after effects or the repercussions which could be possible. So Pakistan's economy, I'm sure you already know, is already in a precarious situation or in dire straits. According to the latest figures of August 2018, just last month, the country's external debt and its foreign liabilities have risen to a frightening 95.097 billion US dollars. 95.097 billion US dollars. Our foreign exchange reserves, ladies and gentlemen, have depleted to just $10.35 billion in our State Bank of Pakistan. And the current account or the trade deficit had peaked to $17.99 billion in July this year. Amid this situation of acute financial crisis, there are serious apprehensions that this CPEC's debt servicing, which will fully begin in 2023, 2024, although part of it has already begun in this year, 2018, 2019 financial year, when early harvest projects see their completion. It may push, God forbid, it may push Pakistan into a default kind of a situation or an economic meltdown. Uh, with unknown consequences for the viability of the state and the stability of our region. There are reports that Pakistan would eventually end up paying 90 billion US dollars over a period of 30 years to the Chinese state and private sector investors. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, has already warned to expect an outflow, a cash outflow from our national kitty to the tune of US dollar 4.5 billion dollars every year from our national reserves. So IMF has further counseled Pakistan to rationalize its tax incentives and exemptions, which it is currently giving to the Chinese investors. So I hope this might have given you an overall view of how much the last government had bestowed economic concessions to our Chinese partners, and how much liabilities it has assumed in return to the state of Pakistan. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I come to this end of part 7. Um, in the next segment, which will be part 8, inshallah, I will return with a discussion on 9 special economic zones, or what are they called as the SEZs, along with a discussion on a free trade agreement, Sino-Pakistan free trade agreement, and how this free trade agreement, or FTA, has brought us disadvantages to our local industry or business houses or entrepreneurs. So until then, please take good care. I will be back with the next discussion on SEZs. Thank you very much.